To hear, look, like Deputy OD, I'd like to welcome Naomi and Caroline to the our social protection meeting here this morning. And I know I've met both organisations since being elected back in February, and certainly from the outset, I have to put my cards on the table and say most, if not all, of the measures that both organisations have put forward. Certainly, I agree with them, and as do my party. And we will be launching our pre-budget submission in the next week or so. And I would imagine most of the measures in which you touch on there in your pre-budget submission will be, addressed as they have been in previous years from my party. So, just to commend both organisations for the work that you do on an ongoing basis, and certainly picking up, I suppose, the broken pieces that the state have left behind, and those pieces are unfortunately families, marginalised people that have been forgotten about, and the statistics show quite clearly they are the ones who are bearing the brunt. They are the families, the older people who are at most risk from poverty. They're the lone parents who we know 60% fit into a category where they are the most susceptible to poverty. So just to commend the work of both organisations and the volunteers that work on the ground, helping out people on a daily basis and go above and beyond their duty. So just a few specific points there I want to raise just in relation to age action, and some of these issues I suppose cross over into both organisations, and both organisations deal with them. But just in relation, and I'll start off with the fuel allowance. Now, I know the measures that have been introduced, the cuts, cutting it back from 32 weeks back to 26 weeks, there have been marginal increases last year in addressing that, but certainly it's not staying with the rate of inflation, and we know how much fuel costs have increased over the last number of years. But we know that 28% of households across the state are experiencing fuel poverty, and we've heard all of the stories and some of the case examples that were outlined in your submission. I'm sure we could all sit here and reiterate so many different cases of that, and these are real people who are rationing the amount of fuel that they burn. They're going to bed when that ration of fuel has run out. They're sitting on trains going down the country. They're sitting in public buildings to try keep warm. And we've all come across these people. So unfortunately, the cuts that have been implemented, going right back going back to 2008, and these are some of St Vincent de Paul's own statistics. In 2008, the assistance that St Vincent de Paul was given towards helping families out with energy costs was 3.8 million, and that figure jumped to 10 million in 2013, and at the same time we see the cuts being introduced by successive governments in terms of the fuel allowance. So I think that's an issue that certainly needs to be addressed in this budget, and I take on board the proposal there about a bulk payment. I know some fuel companies allow oil, you can buy it by the barrel or the bucket now, but certainly at an increased cost. So certainly that is something that as a party I'm only too willing to look at and take on board. But the whole issue of fuel poverty and the fuel allowance also needs to be increased. It needs to be increased from the 26 weeks and start reversing the cuts that have been implemented. The other issue there, and this was a cut that affects our older population, and we know the old age pension age was pushed out to 66, and we know the impact that has had. We did have the state transition pension that was in place, that was removed back in 2012. But the impact that has had, and if anyone sits down, and I know Age Action Ireland have looked at this, the impact that has had on people once they hit retirement age, having worked all their lives or whatever, they hit 65, they're now forced onto job seekers to get a payment. And we have a look at the figures there of people who, at that age, 65, that have signed on for job seekers. There's 2,590 men and women that have signed on for job seekers, higher than any other category. And that, in my mind, sets off alarm bells, that these people, for a whole year, they're locked out of drawing down their state pension, in which they've paid contributions to over their entire working life, and they're locked out of that, and they're forced onto job seekers. 2,590 fit into that category, and there's a serious problem there. And with the abolishment of the state transition pension, that is compounded the problem that, these older people, they're €45, at least €45 less well off than someone in receipt of the state pension. And I think that's an area that certainly it's well highlighted, and it's an issue that needs to be addressed. Also, the contributions, the PRSI contributions, increased up to 520 contributions from 260, again compounding the difficulties there for our older population accessing state pensions and getting the full entitlements. And I think that's an issue that this committee needs to get our teeth into and have a look at. And I know there was a discussion around that earlier, and it needs to be looked at. One of the meanest cuts that had been introduced for our older population, in my mind, was the removal of the bereavement grant. It was a small payment of €850 to help people bury a loved one. And that's an area that has impacted right across the board. And we know there's a discretion there for community welfare officers to help out in situations like that, but it's at the discretion of the community welfare officer. And I think, again, the removing of that bereavement grant, it's hit so many people at a time when they're at their most vulnerable. It's forcing them into the, not just further debt, but in many cases into the arms of loan sharks as well. And I think that needs to be looked at, and hopefully the Minister has taken on board the submissions and will seek to reverse that. And when I speak about loan sharks, and we know, and certainly I welcome, and I met with the League of Credit Unions, and I welcome the fact that we have the micro credit loans. And just a question, because I was speaking to some people there during the week, and they said not all credit unions had signed up to this, and that's disappointing, because I think the micro credit loan, it's a fantastic source of funds for people who might have poor credit ratings, or might have been at the hands of some of the organisations out there that are charging exorbitant interest rates on loans. And I think more needs to be done to encourage all credit unions to sign up to that, to ensure that people who are at their most vulnerable, marginalised in society, can get cheap, affordable loans from the credit union. Just a couple of, I suppose, issues there for St Vincent de Paul. And we know, and the statistics show quite clearly, that lone parents by far are the people who are most susceptible to poverty. And we know all the figures there. We know the fact that 97,000 children are in a constant state of poverty. And it was interesting when we had the Minister in here at our previous meeting. I asked him what specific measures the government have to tackle the whole issue of poverty, particularly child poverty. And he started giving me a lecture on the definition of poverty. Instead of giving a specific answer as to what measures they're going to put in place. And again, I put down PQs to the Minister around what specific measures he and his government are going to take to deal with poverty. And again, a lecture about improving the economy, etc., etc. But unless there's a specific measure, we're going to be, unfortunately, looking at all of these issues again. So just, the whole issue of lone parents, the changes to the one family payment, and how that's impacted on lone parents once the child hits 7 years of age. And we know all of the stories there, and the case examples that have been given. But it's an issue that seriously does need to be tackled, and again, it's an issue that this committee is going to have to get our teeth into. And again, my party and I will be bringing forward specific measures in our budget submission, and hopefully some of these will be taken on board by the government. Another area there I just want to focus on, and again a timely issue, is the whole cost of sending children back to school. And we know the figures from the different surveys that have been carried out, that it can cost to send a child back to primary level can cost up to €900. For secondary school, it can cost up to €1,500. And again, we know the cuts that have been implemented to the back to school clothing and footwear allowance. Cuts going back to 2011, cutting it from €200 down to €150, and the impact that has had. And if you have a look again at the cost and the breakdown of expenditure given by St Vincent de Paul, you can see where these cuts are being implemented by government, the demand for assistance from organisations such as St Vincent de Paul spikes. And to see that the cost of expenditure direct to households and needs from St Vincent de Paul has increased by 27% since 2009, and the cost there isn't a specific breakdown to hand here, but maybe we can get it for around education, how much is going in to help families send their children back to school, if you have a specific breakdown on that. But again, we see where these cuts are being implemented, the demand on organisations such as St Vincent de Paul spikes. So certainly, I would echo the call to increase the back-to-school clothing and footwear allowance. The reality, and again, I would be critical of the Minister when I asked him specific questions on the floor of the Dáil. Instead of dealing with the specific questions, he starts giving false arguments about the 6 counties up in the north, where certainly you cannot compare a like with a like, because we know education is free up in the 6 counties as opposed to down here, with the cost of school uniforms, the cost of books, and indeed the cost of iPads and other associated IT.
Thank you, Deputy.